This week, Islamic State militants blew up Mosul's famed al-Nuri mosque and then tried to blame it on Iraqi forces. Iraqi generals say the bombing proves the battle for Mosul is almost won. But fleeing civilians and aid groups say the humanitarian crisis in Iraq is far from over. VOA's Heather Murdock filed this report from the scene of recent fighting in Mosul's Old City.
This is Mosul's Old City, where there has been heavy fighting over the past few days. You also don't see any civilians around here, as most everyone in this area has fled. Only a few hundred meters from here, the al-Nuri Mosque, both the symbolic heart of the Islamic State and an ancient treasure of this region, was bombed last night by IS militants. We can't get to the mosque now because the bomb site is still heavily guarded by sniper fire and mortars. Soldiers say IS wanted to destroy the mosque in advance of an Iraqi and Coalition victory over the group in Mosul. Generals from Iraq's elite special forces, or Golden Division, say the destruction signifies the end of the group's power here. Fleeing civilians say inside neighborhoods still held by IS, families are starving, and mortars, bombs, and IS sniper fire are still killing people as they run.
And for an update now on the situation many civilians are up against in the Old City, we are joined by phone in Mosul by VOA Middle East correspondent Heather Murdock, who of course filed that report for us, and from the Pentagon by our Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. I thank you both for joining us. Heather, it definitely looks like a war zone there in western Mosul. What's the mood like there? Are you seeing any civilians at all? What's it like walking around western Mosul?
There are very few civilians left in any areas that recently have had battles. The battles recently have been so brutal that every single person ran out as soon as they can, and a lot of people died trying to do so. Outside of the war zone well, it's still technically a war zone, but farther away from the battles, there are some people who have come back, some people that stayed, very few people stayed, but some of the neighborhoods have some shops and a little bit of life, but there's also huge swaths of the city that have been captured by Iraqi forces and are just virtually abandoned. And the only people you see are people going back to their homes to try to gather property that they left when they ran away initially.
Heather,
inside...
Go on. Sorry,
inside the Old City, though, there's still almost 100,000 people, it's believed, to be trapped. And they're coming out of the Old City. They're running away at about thousands a day at this point.
I wanted to talk to you about that, Heather, because in one of your recent reports that I viewed, you said Islamic State is holding thousands of civilians as human shields. Does this perhaps suggest a sense of desperation that, in fact, the area surrounding that mosque may actually be Islamic State's last stand in Iraq? Is there a sense of that?
Yes, there's definitely a sense of that. And the fact that there are so many, they're using so much of their weapons. It seems like they're using everything they can, and they seem to be targeting civilians as much as soldiers. Civilians that start trying to run are getting consistently shot at, far more so than in the past. It seems like there's a sense that they know they're going to die, and they want to take as many people along with them. At the same time, I talked to an Iraqi official today that said there's a lot of militants are also fleeing themselves, disguising themselves as refugees, trying to convince families to say they're with them as they run away. And they apparently arrest 20 to 30 people a day trying to get out that they believe to be Islamic State militants. Okay,
and Carla, let me turn to you now. What does U.S. intelligence have to say about conditions for civilians in western Mosul? Is there any truth to the fact that some say they're being used as human shields? What's the Pentagon saying about that?
It's a very difficult situation, and the Pentagon has called on Islamic State not to do that, and then they've called Islamic State a very brutal competitor because of those horrific tactics. I don't know if you recall, back in March, the U.S. was actually lured in to striking a target with about 100 civilians, over 100 civilians, when Islamic State put 2 snipers on a roof and then bombed and booby-trapped the entire building. So they herded civilians in, baited the U.S. in with 2 snipers. The U.S. took out those snipers with a bomb that was not even big enough to take down an entire building, nowhere near that. But the entire building was exploded because of that, and more than 100 civilians were killed. This is the brutal tactic, just one of many that Islamic State has been using, and it makes it very difficult for Iraqi forces trying to get that last bastion. But they are moving slowly, and Iraqi forces do feel that this is the last stand and it is about to fall because of the circumstances and because they were able to bomb that mosque. Now, Islamic State has claimed that it was not Islamic State that bombed the mosque. They say that it was the coalition, but I was speaking to a coalition spokesman just this morning who told me that the United States was nowhere near that mosque. There were strikes being conducted in Mosul, but there were none at that mosque at the time. There's no evidence on their side to support that, and none of the independent sources have come up and supported that claim as well. So it seems like a big lie by the Islamic State.
Right. Carla, are there any reliable numbers on how many Islamic State fighters those Iraqi forces are actually facing off against?
We don't know specifics, but my sources tell me that they are down to just a few hundred fighters. But remember, Mill, a few hundred fighters can go a long way when they are properly supported and propped up. Remember in Sirte, Libya, when Islamic State fighters took just a couple of neighborhoods and they just held on to them for months and months and months. You don't know if this is going to happen, but what we do know is, as Heather pointed out, some of the Islamic State fighters are trying to leave, but the foreign fighters, they can't blend in with the civilian population. They are there to fight and die, and they're going to hold on as long as they can.
Heather, given the sniper fire that we're hearing about around that shattered mosque, what is the strategy for Iraqi forces? Are they essentially just surrounding the perimeter? What's the next step?
There's several different Iraqi forces on the ground fighting, and they work together and they also work independently. They are all slowly moving in, and it was towards the very center, towards that old neighborhood where that mosque is. And they say that it might happen quickly. They might be able to do this within, say, a few days or a week, but they're not willing to put any timeline on it because their main goal is what they say is to try to rescue the civilians trapped inside. They've also sort of changed the language on it. They're calling them hostages, not even human shields, not even civilians, hostages. So as they're getting in, as they move forward, they call out to the families as when they get close enough, you know, run, and the people run away as soon as they can, and then they move past the houses after the people have run and fight the militants there. That's their strategy anyway.
Carla, in the amount of time I have left, I know you were at the Pentagon for a briefing coming from Baghdad. Are you expecting an update at all on the situation there in Mosul today?
Well, I'm pretty sure that we're going to hear more about Mosul and how it is in its final strongholds. We do not know how long it's going to fall, but I'm sure that they will also reiterate that Mosul is not the end-all, be-all in the fight against Islamic State in Iraq. There are still thousands of fighters on that Euphrates River Valley area between Syria and Iraq. That will likely be the next place that Iraqi forces have to go to push militants out there.
Right. It is a complicated chessboard for sure. My thanks to Heather Murdock and Carla Babb. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, the latest on the Russia probe and whether the president is recording conversations in the White House. We'll let you know. This is The Correspondent on Voice of America.